This is Suzanne Wagner of the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In the next hour, you will view a conversation I held with Jane Hollister Wheelwright, a leading Jungian analyst in the San Francisco area for over 45 years. As a young married woman, Jane traveled to Zurich with her husband Joe to meet C.G. Jung. The meeting with Jung changed their lives. Joe decided to pursue a career as a psychiatrist, and both he and Jane ended up working with Jung periodically over many years. Jane has said that Jung was her major teacher. Jane has been an active analyst involved in teaching and writing, as well as in working with individuals analytically. In 1981, she published a book, Death of a Woman, which tells the story of her work with a young woman dying of cancer. In 1988, another important book came out in which Jane reflects on her return to the landscape of her childhood and her reawakening to the potent relationship between man and nature. This interview was filmed in the beautiful mountain retreat, which Jane and Joe built on land originally belonging to the vast Hollister Ranch. Hollister Ranch was a working cattle ranch and the place where Jane spent most of her childhood. This land has been in the Hollister family for generations. Jane Wheelwright has contributed much to the training of Jungian analysts over the years and is one of the founders of the Professional Society of Jungians in Northern California and of the formal training program of the Jung Institute there. This interview was filmed on a warm afternoon in July of 1977. Can you talk a little bit about when you first met Jung, how that happened, and what some of your impressions of Zurich were?
I had an aunt. It was my mother's sister. As a matter of fact, who really was back of the whole library system of California. And her system was taken to Russia, and I mean, she was quite an important person, but she went off her rocker. She just became schizophrenic. And we didn't know what to do. You know, nobody knew anything about schizophrenics. And we had an awfully nice internist, I think you call him, a man called Podstata. And Podstata took care of her for, 4 years maybe. And then he finally said, well, if you really want to try something that just might work, there's a man in Europe who can reach schizophrenics. And he said, why don't you try it? So we took her there. It was Jung. And he had a few interviews with her. She was completely off the map. And she was very hostile to him. And then we talked to him afterwards, and he said, yes, he said, I could bring her back. He said, but he said, it's a big job. And he said, what I would do is to pick up all isolated associations or thoughts or whatever she produced and get the thread. But he said she'd have to live in Zurich for the rest of her life. He said, I could make her into what he called a floating case. And as a matter of fact, I think he did that for quite a few people that turned out to be rather important people. And
but stayed around Zurich.
But they had to live in Zurich.
Mm-hmm. Around him.
I guess the transference. And he says, I've got so many of them. I just cannot take one more on. So that was the end of that. In the meantime, Joe got fascinated by him. And I guess Joe just said right away that that's what I'm going to be if I can. That's what I'd like to be. And so from there on, we kept connection with him. And that was in 1932. Yes.
Well, what about you? When did you begin to feel that it would be
I was not so enamored of him at first. I thought the way he talked. Or no, it was his writing. Of course, it was very intuitive writing, and it wasn't my dish. And I kept thinking, who the hell does he think he is? You know, how does he? How do you know what he's saying? I mean, how does he know what he's saying is right? And I was really very resistant. And then, but Joe had him taped. He was all right. And then we had to live in London because Joe had to get a medical degree. That would only take about 8 years. And we had to live in a basement. And we were, because it was the bottom of the Depression. We had no money. And we lived on $150 a month. And it was pretty hard going. And then we had Linda. She was a toddler. And then we got John. And all in the basement. And after John was born, I got into a terrific depression. Well, anyway, the depression and so forth, so I got to Jung. And right away, I thought, well, that's the man for me. And so we moved to Zurich, and I saw him for some months. I liked his opening comment. He said, oh, so you're in the soup too. I like the two.
Could be in it together.
Yeah. But then we just took on from there.
Well, how long was it until you thought about becoming an analyst yourself?
Oh, quite a long time. Because I had no qualifications. I didn't go to college. I had 1 year of college. I couldn't stand it. And then, and I don't know, there was so much family demands and stuff. And Joe had to go to college. Joe went off to medical school when Linda went off to nursery school. They went off together. But then I've known Jung for all those years since, seeing him off and on.
And what did he think? Did you talk to him about your becoming an analyst? Was that?
No, it never got to that.
Never
got to that point. No, I thought I'd like to do that when I got back here, and I'm not sure he thought I'd be a good one. I don't think he had me lined up for an analyst.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sort of pick it up as best I could because there's no training. There's absolutely nothing formal that you could do to become a Jungian analyst.
Some ways, don't you think that's better?
Well, I don't know, except we learned on our patients. And I don't know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing for the patients. I think occasionally it was like we were learning together. And sometimes I think we were pretty lethal. I mean...
Guinea pigs.
They were just really guinea pigs, yeah. So...
Well, what about the atmosphere in Zurich at that time?
Well, that's what put me off. Oh, the cultism was just reeking. It was just awful. There were the transferences. And I swore I would never get a transference. That one thing I decided right away, because it just looked too awful. I mean, these people were just goofy. And but I got a transference.
Couldn't help it.
Couldn't help it. Because I mean, after all, you get a transference because what's missing in you has got to be seen in somebody else. And there was plenty missing in me, and with a man of Jung's caliber, there's a lot missing. But I never felt as though I had too much transference. It didn't last too long because Jung the one nice thing about, or the good thing about him was he gave so much of himself. He just gave you everything he had. So it wasn't as though you had a hangover. You got it all, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then did he let you go? I mean, he didn't.
And he was he was very glad to let you go. He liked to see you get on the road and take off. And I mean, he was bombarded by people. He didn't want people hanging around. And he said very often, he said, the best work he did was without transference. So, and I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but I think he hated the transference. He couldn't stand that kind of, that sort of, that sticky sort of thing.
Were seminars going on at that time? English?
He had every week he held forth, and then people could ask questions or show up how much they knew and so on, and some of them did. And he was trying out his ideas on. As a matter of fact, that's why the group got together, was because he was so isolated himself, and that it took these people. They were, in a way, people that he could try his ideas out on and develop his ideas. I think he thought up a lot of new ideas as he was talking. I mean, it was all evolving. And I think, and he had a lot of Americans around him, and he was always grateful to the Americans because they really discovered him. The Swiss didn't know he was, well, I mean, they just paid no attention to him. I would say they were very critical of him. And so there was some English, but mostly Americans.
What did he offer Americans? What do you think? Why was that?
I think his interest, and that's why he took me on, was his interest was in this primitive and modern split.
And Americans have a particularly...
And he said it was in America. That's where it was, you see. And so I think that was a kind of getting together of this idea of his and the people that were in it.
Mm-hmm.
And,
what about his relationship to the psychology of women? And do you think he understands women?
I have to remember our first appointment, because Joe and I went together, and he talked right over the top of my head to Joe, arranging my appointments. And I finally said, well, where do I come in? And he said, oh, that comes later. And I'll never forget that, because talk about sort of disposing of you. He really did it. But I think that what he did for women came through his tremendous interest in the individual. And women could be individuals too. And this problem of what is feminine and what is masculine and so forth and so on almost came as second to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a sense, and then of course his discovery of the animus and the anima, that did a lot. I mean, and he would, except that they always told us, you know, if you have any animus around the place, stay away from men. And I find with young people, with Linda, for instance, they don't stay away from men. They can have animus around men. And that brings in another dimension. But we were told you must never inflict the animus on a man.
You mean by Jungians at that time?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. It didn't seem to matter whether a man inflicted the anima around the place. That was kind of brushed over. And Jung could throw a good old anima fit. If ever I saw one, he could do it as well as anybody. But Amalus told me that he got into a rage with her, a very unnecessary rage about something. And she said if ever she saw an anima, that was one. And she said he came around afterwards, sought her out, and apologized. So I think he was taking responsibility for it too. But it cut loose.
So there's been a change, you think, in the time since then among Jungians, the acceptance of the animus of the woman.
Yeah, now the animus is not such a dirty word.
So a woman had to keep herself in a kind of a quiet place with a man in her, or follow his anima more.
Yeah.
Become more his anima.
Become more his anima and not be a problem as much as
reflect back to him.
Yeah. He was the fountainhead and a few other things. I wasn't raised that way.
What about Tony Wolff? Can you tell me about her?
She had a lot of the Oriental in the background. Her father had a great many dealings with Japan, I think it was.
Oh.
And I've often thought that had a lot of influence on her because she was very father-oriented.
So that worked as a kind of a getting her ready for the relationship to Jung.
Well, that made her more of the anima.
More attractive.
I mean, how does an anima woman start? I don't know.
Yeah.
I imagine she starts pretty much in the relation to the father. Because she was the kind of person that could give herself over completely to the man. So his ideas were what mattered, and that was what mattered to her. And I don't think she was very original from the point of view of just being on her own. But she was a tremendously impressive person. I would never underrate Tony Wolff. He was a tremendous person. She looked like Nefertiti. She was really something. And she dressed in a way to enhance it. And I think she is terrifically important to Jung. I don't think she ended up so strong, but through all those years of when he was cooking up his ideas, I think she had a great deal to do with it. I analyzed with her some, and I didn't get along too well with her. She had absolutely no connection with the primitive.
Oh, she didn't?
Totally sophisticated, civilized.
That's right. I've heard stories about how she found Bollingen very difficult because of its primitive quality.
Well, she claimed that the arthritis that she got in her hands was because of Bollingen.
What about Emma Jung? Did you know her at all?
I didn't know her at all. She was very shy. And of course there was that threesome problem. And she'd turn up at these seminars and she'd sit way over on one side and Tony on the other side. And I think what's remarkable is that they made it. And I think they're the ones, that Tony and Emma are the ones that made the threesome situation possible. They worked out something between them.
Did they end up having some kind of a relationship?
Well, I would have said it was on the surface, really. Emma was, she was sensation. And I think she was a minority person in that sense, because all the intuitives were just taking off all around her, and I think she was just lagging behind and had no company from anybody. So I think, in a sense, she had to be a pioneer, and it was harder for her. And a feeling type, so the business of ideas and stuff wasn't particularly her dish. Although I think she accomplished an awful lot.
She did in her writing. Yeah.
She was a big person, I think, but under the shadow of Jung. He was just, I think he was just too much. He was great in the analytical hour because he could be just knew better than you. I mean, you could be just a pipsqueak, and that was all right. I mean, he didn't make you feel as though you were inferior or anything. But I imagine keeping house for him might not have been so easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder, what do you think Jung would have thought about the cultural changes that have occurred since then?
I think he would have gone with him. I really do. He cared a great deal about what he saw in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
And he always tried to understand it. He didn't come in with a bunch of prejudices. You had the feeling that he was extremely sensitive. That's the way he was with you when you analyzed with him. You had a feeling that his slate was swept clean, that he had no preconceived ideas, and that he was going to start right from where you were.
Yeah.
And I think he was that way all the way around in his life. And I think he would have been interested. I think he would have gone along with the women's movement. I think he would have been pretty annoyed by a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a lot of it is annoying.
But he would have taken it on.
But he would have said, this is a phenomenon. This comes at this time, and there must be a darn good reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he would have understood it. He would have come up with some rather interesting ideas about it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the women's movement?
Oh, of course, I was raised in that way. I was the only female in my generation. There were 7 of us. I mean, cousins and myself. And so I was expected to be like them. And everything they did, I had to do too. So I never learned that women are supposed to be different. I was smaller, not as husky as some of the others. So I got the other kind of jobs. Linda said I should explain that when we went around, you know, we had crops, and we had thrashers, and we had wagons, loading wagons. We had to load all kinds of stuff, like corn or wheat or whatever we were growing, or white beans and so on. Well, I always drove the teams.
Okay.
And that was just great. And the others did all the heavy physical work.
So you never had any problem feeling strong and independent, and that was just in your blood and
I just
in the atmosphere.
taken for granted that if you weren't strong, it was just too bad. You better be. And I became quite physically strong. But, you know, we'd go out on the roundups, and I had to open the gates. Nobody opened the gates for me. You know, and they were tough gates.
Well, so you're coming at the problem of being a woman from another angle.
I was really, and my mother was very modern. After all, she went to Germany and got a PhD when women didn't do that kind of thing. So she was very sympathetic. So she didn't get in my way at all. So hitting the East and then hitting Europe, it became a problem.
You were a fish out of water as a woman.
Very much of a fish out of water. Especially with this animus development. Because you see, I was living the animus. Then all of a sudden the animus had nowhere to go. And so it backfired on me like this. And I was the most surprised and horrified person of all, really, having to cope with it. And then Jung's idea of the animus and everything was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, at the time you met him, weren't you politically pretty far left? Weren't you
Yes.
communist
Yes.
or leaning in that?
Yes. I came from a very radical family. My mother was radical. My father wasn't. But my uncle became quite a famous radical, Lincoln Steffens. And so I spent a great deal of time with him. I met all the radicals. He had a house that was like Grand Central Station. They all came through. And I was there for over a year with him, and I just met everybody, and I was absolutely goggle-eyed by all this stuff, you know, and I became, and got to Jung, and then found him extremely politically conservative. I mean, his idea was a perfectly good idea, the idea of the importance of the individual and not collective. And of course, the radical business is all concerned with the collective. And so I found all of a sudden, with no warning whatsoever, I suddenly realized this whole business of communism was a projection of the collective unconscious. It was collective out there, collective in here. And then I just reversed everything, and I lost all interest in the whole communist thing. That's when the communism was experimental, and that was before the trials, when we became so disillusioned, you know, and all that kind of thing. And my uncle was over there during the revolution and knew all the revolutionaries, and so it wasn't so out of line to be interested in communism. I wouldn't be now, quite apart from the business of the collective unconscious. I wouldn't be interested now because I wouldn't want to live there.
Why?
I'd rather be an individual. I don't want to be told what I think, and if I have some kind of talent, I don't want them to cut me down on it. I like the freedom of doing it. I'm fortunate. We sold these ranches, so I got some money, so I can indulge. I feel very sad about people who can't do that. But I think Jung's idea is a good one. I'm not against his political conservatism.
But it was quite a confrontation, wasn't it?
Well, it was one of the things, just like when I read his intuitive stuff and I didn't see anything that proved it to me. I didn't see any sensation that impressed me. I thought, well, he's just talking through his hat, and I just can't go for that stuff. Until I got in trouble and had him head on, and then, my God, he just made all kinds of sense.
I understand you've just written a book yourself. And I wonder if some of your ideas, some of the observations you've made are going to be in that.
Well, I try to get everything into it. I had a co-author. I mean, I can't write, so, but I got this friend of mine who's a sensation type. A patient was a sensation, she's sensation, I was sensation, I am sensation. So we did a sensation book. And she kept throwing my stuff out. She says, you just can't overload this book.
You mean with more examples?
I was trying to get everything into it that I had ever thought about. So she pared it down quite a bit. It's on a terminal case. It's all about death and so on.
Someone you were working with?
Yes, a patient of mine who died of cancer. I got her after she had cancer 7 years. A woman, she was only 37 years old. She had 2 kids, husband, all the works. And she was sensation, extroverted. They're the ones that have the least connection with the unconscious. And that was, I think, one of her problems. I think she was not functioning. She was very gifted. She could do anything. She could write, she could direct plays, and she'd read everything. And she was a tremendously accomplished person, but she wasn't much of a domestic person. But anyway, I had 6 months with her because she was dead in 6 months. And I was trying to help her get something out of life. Well, as a matter of fact, she was suicidal when I got her, because she just said, "This is it. I can't go any further." She was crippled. You just have no idea what she looked like. It was just awful. And but I got her, but she had the most absolutely fantastic dreams. And that's where I think all the sensation people's intuition is. It's in their dreams. And she had some marvelous dreams, and all about life, and not many statements about death. So mostly about life and the continuation of life. I think Jung says that the unconscious seems to want to go on, and that certainly proved to be with her.
So did that help her face her death?
Well, she was from Missouri. She wasn't going to believe a thing unless it was proved 10 times over. And that's why she was a tough case, but also why I had to pull out every stop I had, because, and that's why I collected so many of my thoughts, is because I had to do it this way or that way or the other way or the other way. So finally she got it. But she talked about suicide. So I said, "Well, I'll find out how many you need." She said, "I don't want too many because that'll only make it messy, and then it'll
Too many
I'll
what?
probably be revived."
You mean pills?
Pills.
Oh.
And you're not supposed to do that. And I'm not a doctor. But I did it. And so she had the right number of pills beside her, tucked under her mattress. And every now and then we'd talk about whether she wanted to kill herself, and she'd say, "No, not yet. No, not yet." Well, she went on till pneumonia killed her finally, because she said, "I'm too curious. I want to know what's going to happen." In other words, she did get into life, in some kind of a life. And it was through these dreams. And every time I saw her, she said, "I've got another one." Would tell me about it. And she was really covering being only 37. And I said, "Well, I'm pushing 70. This was some time ago. So I guess we've got to sort of figure this thing out together." And I think in a way she did kind of rather live a lifetime in her 6 months. And I think being sensation type, in a subliminal, if that's the right word, subliminal way, she was experiencing rebirth, initiation, all the things that you're supposed to. But it wasn't overt. And my intuitive friends tell me she didn't make it. But I think she did, because it was something that went along through her sensation her body kind of knew about it.
Well, your intuitive friends say that when they look at her dreams, you mean?
The material.
Oh, I see.
And so I have a feeling there are different ways of handling sensation people. And I think that a great deal goes on that is not, you can't see. These dreams, she would think about them and think about them and think about them and think about them ad nauseum. See, sensation people can repeat. They repeat forever until the thing becomes part of them. Whereas an intuitive can't stand the repetition. And I think there are a lot of these things that would help Jungians to know. And I had a feeling of things happening although she would say, oh, I think that's a lot of rot. I don't believe that at all. And I'd come out with some bright statement. And yet, you know, she wouldn't stop thinking about it. And somehow or other, it became part of her. So I think she did develop that way. And she died peacefully. And whereas she was a terrible rebel, angry, negative, critical. Oh God, she was just everything negative you could think of. But she ended up as accepting her fate and not fighting in a very peaceful sort of way. And I think she made it. But we can argue about that.
Well, what effect did working with her have on you in terms of your thinking about death or your...
Oh, I began to think a lot about it, you know, and I began to get... it's terribly hard to be articulate about what you think about death.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of an adjustment. I think people who've been close to death probably know about it. It's, are you going with it or are you fighting it? It's almost as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the dreams, with their long-term statements, are very reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about her is that she had taken care of all that personal unconscious. There was none. Absolutely gone. And she did that all by herself over the 7 years. And she was Freudian, too. Not only all these other things, but she was a Freudian. All of our pals were Freudians. And it was a Freudian who recommended her to me, or me to her. So you couldn't have had anyone more skeptical. And in that way, she forced me to think an awful lot about a lot of things. But I used dream interpretation instead of, because I don't have intuition, so I use dream interpretation as an outside, I mean, the dreams were the outside authority, so to speak. The dreams, and all of her intuitions were in there, and any intuitions I'd have would be in my dreams. So I think we cover the waterfront fairly well.
It's interesting to me that Freudian's friends send her to a Jungian with this problem of you know, facing a terminal illness.
Well, I think they were desperate. There wasn't anybody around. And she said to me, she said, I have to take you. I have no alternative. This was the greeting. But it's a hard thing to talk about. A hard thing to sort of remember. You don't develop theories, and I think it's more of an attitude.
Well, Jung did say in some of his earlier writings that he felt it was important to develop your own personal philosophy or myths about death.
Well, my little sort of thought about it was that I used to think, well, if I could just be the rocks and the trees and the birds, just go on into all, I mean, just become part of all that, that would suit me fine. And then Don Sutner has just written a book on the Navajos, which is a marvelous book. And by golly, that's what they think. And I thought, well, I'm not so, I've got good company. You know, just become, I don't want to become part of city life. That would be like a nightmare. But I suppose you have to include everything.
That's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, but I just like the feeling of it, so I don't need to have any fancy theory.
That's enough of a of a
Yeah,
myth
I mean,
for
if
you?
that's rebirth, if that's reincarnation, if that's any of those things, okay, fine. But I don't. She was not going to have any reincarnation in her life. She said, not after the life she'd lived. She doesn't want any more of that. She said, that's the one thing I wanted to finish, absolutely finish. And as a matter of fact, in some of the Oriental thinking, she wasn't so far off it. It's like nirvana or one of those things. I mean, it's like no more problems.
If you get your work done.
If you get your work done. Mm-hmm. And she did. She got her work done. Well, she did an awful lot of work in those 7 years without knowing it.
So you never know what fate's going to send you when a patient walks in the door. Yeah.
No. I took her on because I was interested. I'd had one terminal case before her. And it was a nurse who didn't have so much education. And terrific dreams, but negative, wild, miserable dreams. Whereas this one had very, very creative, positive ones. But I didn't feel that I got much out of the nurse, so I wanted to have another try. So I took this one on. But you have to be at it all the time.
During the day, Jane's daughter, Linda Schmidt, joined us for a brief time, and we filmed a conversation between Jane and Linda, who is herself a Jungian analyst.
The subject that probably interests me most, being the daughter of two analysts, is, at least as far as this Jung question is concerned, what about his kids, his and Emma's kids, who, especially the daughters, how did they manage? And
well, now, one died of cancer. And Jung's comment was that people die of cancer when they're stuck.
Oh.
And he apparently told Marluce once, and I don't know if this is discreet or not, and Marluce told me that he said, can't you do something about, I've forgotten her name now, she's stuck. And then later, she got cancer.
Oh.
Of course, Emma died of cancer too, but and in a way, I suppose you could say she was stuck. But I don't know enough about her. But the son became very, very conservative, apparently, and great, openly hated her father. Yeah. And we never saw them around the Institute. I never did.
What ages were they in the, say, the 30s?
I think they were on the young side, and maybe that's why be why we didn't see them.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So and Jung made the comment that that he left the whole business of raising the family to Emma because he felt he was not good for them, or too I guess too much for them. This is what he meant. Because he did have rages, you know. He could blow like Vesuvius, and just on a moment's notice. So I imagine it must have been pretty hard living in a household with him,
To say the least.
Yeah. So
did one or another of the children go into the field too?
Great went into astrology.
It's an interesting.
And I think that Emma was good. Was very good in astrology too, as I remember it. Except for the one who died. I mean, they have turned out to be very good citizens, good people.
But still with some hostility around some of the personal.
Well, they don't let much stuff out about
Mm-hmm.
him. They won't let people write about him. They censored Barbara Hannah's book. I think they're all in on it. And they're very, very tough about any kind of comment about Tony Wolff. They won't have it.
Well, they finally have the power.
And they've got the power, sure. They're going to kill her off if
Right.
they can, I guess.
And edit him.
Yeah, although I understand he's written a chapter on Tony Wolff for his memoirs, but there again, I think that the family said no. They couldn't put it in, but somebody's got it. They have to wait for a few people to die off, I guess, to get it out.
It's a complicated subject, being the child of analysts.
You might tell me what it's like.
Yeah. Well, I'm consulting with my daughters what it's like.
Yeah.
And they are somewhat more articulate about it than I have been till now. I assumed, of course, that's how it was for everyone. They seem to understand better that it isn't like that for everyone. Tom Kirsch and I have had some chances to compare notes about how it is to have two in the field. And it does seem as if one of the solutions is to join in and do it too. Which I'm pleased with that solution now, although I tried everything else first. But it is, it's a little bit like you have your fight to be a patient is about the only thing that you can think to do when you are a child of an analyst, is because it does seem as though the patients come number 1, 2, and 3, and then whatever place you can find for yourself. And I think
so you better be a patient. Well, I think it's one of the most lethal professions there is, because you are eaten up.
Yeah, that's
and so what have you got left for the family?
Bones.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a privileged position or something. And there's a lot of inflation around the place too, I think.
There should be enough for you to be the child of an analyst. What more do you want?
Well, the child can certainly humanize the situation quite a lot, I might add. Oh, probably you didn't remember about that.
You know, I was listening to you talk about the woman who died of cancer and your work with her. And in a way, I hope she knows it wherever she is, because it's through her that you and I began to make our connection.
That's right. You read that thing, and
you knew somehow. She was about the same age as I at that time, and you knew somehow to send me that manuscript.
Yeah.
And I sat there and read that thing and came quite unglued and wrote a letter to you about it, and there it began. That was about 9 years ago. Not so bad, huh?
But now, why?
I had a feeling about what you were capable of knowing and experiencing and feeling for another person, my own age, in a mother-daughter kind of an arrangement, that it dawned on me you had been a mother all along, in a sense, though I hadn't known quite how to plug into it. And it was as if that manuscript revealed that to me, that there you were, after all, and probably had been all along if I could have known how to reach.
It's sort of
into
objectified.
Yeah.
Things.
That third person, somehow, I felt no jealousy whatsoever. It was just as if that woman and I had been one, and via her, I could begin to know something about what you were
live
about.
And learn, don't we?
Yeah. So she did that for us. She, through her death, that thing of our beginning. So
there it is.
Yeah.
I've often wondered what you thought about a lot of things.
Right.
Here's your chance.
I'm beginning to sort them out. Yeah, that's. I do remember painting the sign to hang by the front door. Children, please use the back door, which had to do with allowing the patients to come in the front door, so as that they wouldn't be seen.
That's
and
right.
So, and I remember that I painted the sign for that, and I was just while you were talking before, I was thinking, isn't that a funny thing? Sort of painting my own doom, being relegated to the back door. Yeah, there were a lot of complaints, but it took a long time till I knew that I had them even. Yeah. But now, sitting in your shoes, I can see much better how come a lot of things.
Well, there's something wrong with the profession that does people in that much. And I've often wondered if something couldn't be done, or maybe certain more knowledge or
Some
or
recognition.
attitude or something couldn't come out of in the next generation or so, and make it less of a lethal profession.
Maybe it should be rationed how much a human being can pour into that kind of a profession. I don't know how you'd ration it, but
there's the problem of money. You know, you have to earn so much money to raise a family, and it takes, you know, you get so much an hour, and these hours are already overpriced.
Yeah.
And
yeah, there's a ceiling.
there are only so many hours in a day that you can work, and all this. So I think it is a pretty tough question.
Yeah, so you wind up working 8 and 9 hours and 10 hours. And
priests have the same problem, but they don't get married and have families. So they don't try and mix it. Of course, we are all more or less pioneering.
Yeah.
And the Freudians had this business of hiding behind a couch.
So they didn't
that
get
must
so
save
drained.
a lot of wear and tear.
I've heard you say that about the transference, that if there is enough in the relationship, perhaps the transference doesn't have to become so exhausting. So there may be something there. Surely a lot of the stress is in transference energies. They're the hardest to kind of settle. Sure. You have to kind of keep living with them. But the absolute numbers of hours one works has got to be a factor. It's very hard to be the child of two analysts. I go on record.
Yeah, that says it.
That's the thing most recently come alive for me, is what we share in the sensation world, and how poorly defined sensation has been, and no wonder nobody wants to be it, namely things like keeping records and organizing external things. The extroverted sensation seems to have been the bulk of what was ascribed to sensation. And introverted sensation, I'm beginning to learn lately, is quite other than that. And as if it's a realm that hasn't really been relished.
I agree. And that's true, that the few sensation people that have been around Jungian groups have ended up with all the miserable organizing
which
work.
Is no satisfaction for...
And the attitude has been, this is a bit indiscreet, but the attitude has been, any dumbbell can do that.
Yes,
and that doesn't help you to relish your position.
Your chore, right.
You know?
Really. Well, it is the dumbbellist aspect of sensation, this thing of keeping order anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, unless you are of an extroverted sensation nature, maybe then it's
well,
fun.
I'm more disorderly than Joe is.
Uh-huh. Well, I know with all your lists, is obviously the only way you can keep any order at all.
Yeah.
Get it written down quick because it'll escape.
Yeah. Because an introverted sensation takes precedence over anything that's happening outside.
I'm absolutely oblivious. Klaus will say, well, how do I get from there to there? Asking directions, I cannot tell him. He said, don't you see anything? I have just to say, no, I see almost nothing. I experience it utterly. Riding around here on this ranch on a horse, I experience it utterly, but I see nothing. I could ride up and down the Bolito Canyon every day, and it'd be just as fresh the second day as the third, as the 10th.
Yeah, well, that I think accounts for the sensation person being able to repeat so much in the routine. Because in routine that is outer routine activity, then the introverted sensation is released. So it better not change. It better be the same, because otherwise it gets distracting.
That's why I like to wash dishes and don't like to cook.
Yeah, because you have to use something of your ingenuity and stuff for cooking. And washing dishes is
it's mind freeing.
Yeah, I have a hard time with Joe going on walks because he won't repeat the walk, and there aren't very many around here. And
Noon, Jane held a conversation out on the deck with her daughter Linda, her husband Joe, and Sam, Francis, and myself.
well, I first would like to say that you must admit that I got into a profession for relationship reasons, which I think was the neatest trick of the week.
Yeah, well, everybody knows you're a confirmed feeling type, so that's natural. Yeah.
So us,
Well, I was trying to make a point of that. Yes, you did.
yeah, I know.
But have you
us
ever?
non-feelers have our own way of expressing feeling. Okay. No, I've got an enormous amount out of the work. I really did. I'm very lucky that I got into it for whatever reason. I learned mostly about myself, I think. I don't know how much I helped other people to learn about themselves, but I just think it is. Just as when I was on the certifying board, I kept wishing everybody could be on the certifying board because you learn so much. And when I'm in the analytical chair, I keep thinking, if only this poor so-and-so that's in front of me could be in my chair, that person could learn an awful lot too. And I think it's a great learning experience. My father only thought of cattle and what you fed them and that kind of stuff. He never thought of, I'd say, but look how beautiful it is. Oh, he says, it's all right, sure. And that'd be the end of it.
Here's something for the foxes.
Yeah, they'll get it. Don't worry. They'll
They'll get
have it
it.
tonight.